March 27, 2022. The Dolby Theatre. A joke? A slap? Millions watching as Will Smith strikes Chris Rock on live television. And the room doesn't gasp, it applauds. 40 minutes later, Smith wins Best Actor, delivers a tearful speech invoking God and Richard Williams, but not the man he hit. Jim Carrey called it spineless. Dave Chappelle called it the unmasking of 30 years of perfection, revealing something darker beneath. The slap wasn't the story. The story was the system that built the mask that Hollywood celebrated the moment it cracked, and the truth almost no one dared to name. When power overrides justice at the Oscars. Let's stay in the Dolby Theatre for a moment, because the slap itself lasted 2 seconds, and what happened afterward lasted the rest of the night, and said far more about Hollywood than any open palm ever could. An A-list actor walked onto a live stage and physically struck another performer during a globally televised ceremony. In any other profession, at any conference, any corporate event, any public venue, security would have intervened within seconds. The assailant would have been removed. The police would have been called. The show would have been paused. None of that happened. Will Smith returned to his seat. He remained in the auditorium for the rest of the evening. He won his award. He gave his speech. He attended the after-party. Denzel Washington and Tyler Perry reportedly approached him to offer counsel and comfort. Bradley Cooper spoke with him. The machinery of Hollywood's social protocol activated. Not to protect Chris Rock, not to enforce a standard of conduct, but to cushion the man who had just committed the violation. Now, ask yourself, what would have happened if it wasn't Will Smith? What if a character actor, a first-time nominee, an independent filmmaker had walked up on that stage and struck a presenter? Would the room have given them a standing ovation 40 minutes later? Would Denzel Washington have walked over to console them? Would they have been allowed to stay in the building? The answer exposes something uncomfortable. The standing ovation wasn't about excellence. It wasn't about King Richard. It was about power, about who generates revenue, about who fills seats and sells streaming subscriptions and moves global box office numbers. And the room wasn't applauding a performance. It was protecting an investment. This is the machinery that Jim Carrey saw and refused to stay quiet about. Hollywood is just spineless en masse, he said. And the word he used, spineless, wasn't casual. It was surgical. Because it didn't accuse Hollywood of being evil or corrupt. It accused Hollywood of something arguably worse. Knowing something was wrong and choosing to do nothing because it was easier. Because the man who did the wrong thing was worth too much. But Carrey saw something deeper than a broken protocol. He saw a broken person trapped inside a manufactured image. And that's where his analysis went somewhere most commentators couldn't follow. Jim Carrey's avatar theory. To understand what Carrey said about Will Smith, and you need to understand what Carrey has been saying about himself and about all of us for years. Long before the slap, Jim Carrey went through what he described as a spiritual awakening. After filming Man on the Moon in 1999, where he so fully inhabited Andy Kaufman that he essentially lost himself in the role, Carrey emerged from the experience with a destabilizing realization. He had played so many characters that his own identity started to feel like just another one. In an interview with The Talks, Carrey laid it out in terms that sound like philosophy, dressed as comedy. Jim Carrey was an idea my parents gave me. Irish, Scottish, French was an idea I was given. Canadian was an idea I was given. I had a hockey team and a religion, and all of these things that cobble together into this kind of Frankenstein monster. This representation, it's like an avatar. An avatar, not a person, a construct, a curated collection of traits, narratives, and image management that the world recognizes as you, but that doesn't actually exist in any fundamental way. Carrey has spoken about fame as the ultimate proof of this illusion. He once said, "I wish people could realize all their dreams and wealth and fame so that they could see that it's not the answer." He described getting everything he ever wanted, and discovering it changed nothing inside him. The avatar got rich. The avatar got famous. But there was nobody home behind the mask. Now apply that framework to Will Smith. For 30 years, Will Smith maintained what was arguably the most carefully constructed avatar in Hollywood history. The Fresh Prince, the charismatic action star, the family man, and the guy who never swore in his music, the guy who lit up every talk show, the guy who could open a $400 million movie on charm alone. His Q score, a metric that measures how positively the public perceives a celebrity, consistently ranked him among the 5 most liked actors in America. That wasn't an accident. It was architecture. And on the night of March 27, 2022, the architecture collapsed in real time in front of the entire world. When Smith walked up on that stage, it wasn't the avatar defending Jada. It was the man underneath, the one from West Philadelphia, the one who grew up watching his father hit his mother, the one carrying decades of public pressure and private frustration, breaking through a surface that had been holding for 30 years. When Carrey said, "It came out of nowhere because Will has something going on inside him that's frustrated," he wasn't being dismissive. He was identifying the exact mechanism. The avatar had been absorbing blows for decades. Public humiliation about his marriage, tabloid cycles, the pressure of being universally beloved. And the real person underneath finally snapped. What Carrey exposed wasn't just a bad night. It was the cost of building an identity around a performance. The cost of being a living brand. The cost of suppressing your actual self so completely that when it finally surfaces, it arrives as violence. If Carrey exposed the psychology, Chappelle exposed the system that made it possible. Hollywood's two-tier morality. In 2005, Dave Chappelle did something that the entertainment industry still hasn't fully processed. He walked away from $50 million. Chappelle's show was the biggest thing on Comedy Central. The network offered him a deal worth $50 million to continue. And Chappelle turned it down, disappeared to South Africa, and didn't explain himself for years. When he finally did, the explanation was as simple as it was damning. The industry had started to change him. He didn't like the way certain people were laughing at his material, not with him, but at the communities he was depicting. The machinery of production was pressuring him to be more extreme, more provocative, more Dave Chappelle, the brand, not the person. He felt the system was turning him into something he didn't recognize. And he walked away because he understood something that most people in the industry either don't see or refuse to acknowledge. Hollywood doesn't just discover stars, it manufactures them. It takes raw human beings and refines them into products. It assigns them images, narratives, and market positions. And then it protects those products, not out of loyalty, but out of financial interest. That's the context behind Chappelle's most devastating observation about the slap. When he stood in front of a Liverpool crowd and said, "Will Smith did the impression of a perfect person for 30 years, and he ripped his mask off and showed us he was as ugly as the rest of us," he wasn't insulting Smith. He was indicting the system that required the mask in the first place. The word impression is doing critical work in that sentence. So an impression isn't a lie exactly. It's a performance so sustained that it becomes indistinguishable from reality for the audience and, eventually, for the performer. Hollywood needed Will Smith to be the impression, the brand, the safe, bankable, universally appealing product. And Will Smith delivered that impression so well for so long that when the real person surfaced, it registered as a shock to the entire world. Chappelle also observed the selective nature of Hollywood's morality. 6 weeks after the Oscars, Chappelle himself was physically attacked on stage at the Hollywood Bowl by a man carrying a replica gun fitted with a knife blade. Chris Rock happened to be backstage and walked out to the mic afterward, asking the crowd, "Was that Will Smith?" The joke landed, but it also highlighted something deeply uncomfortable. When Will Smith struck Chris Rock, the room gave Smith a standing ovation. When a stranger attacked Dave Chappelle, Jamie Foxx leaped from the crowd. Jon Stewart charged from backstage. Security pummeled the assailant, and every celebrity in attendance ran to Chappelle's defense. As Chappelle later observed in his Netflix special The Dreamer, every celebrity just ran out because every celebrity saw themselves in me. Then he paused and added, "And I know Chris was backstage looking like, 'Nobody helped me.'" The double standard was the point. Hollywood protects who it chooses to protect, not based on principle, based on leverage. The illusion of accountability. In the weeks and months following the slap, the machinery of consequence activated, but in a way that revealed its own limits. But Will Smith resigned from the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences before they could vote on his membership. The Academy subsequently banned him from attending Oscar-related events for 10 years. Projects stalled. His Q score, that sterling reputation metric, plummeted from a positive 39 to 24 by August 2022, then sank further to 19 by early 2024, according to Q Score's executive VP Henry Schauffer. Apple's Emancipation, which should have been an awards contender, was released into a vacuum of public goodwill. The Oscars ignored it. Smith won the NAACP Image Award, but in terms of the broader industry, the door had closed. And then, the door opened again. In June 2024, Bad Boys: Ride or Die opened to $56 million domestically and $104.6 million globally. Smith's agents at CAA started calling studio executives for the first time since the slap. There were reports he was pushing to have the Oscar ban rescinded. The math was simple. The man was still selling tickets. This is where the illusion of accountability reveals itself. The consequences Smith faced were real, but they were also temporary and calibrated not by moral principle, but by market performance. A 10-year ban sounds severe until you realize it primarily affects a ceremony, not a career. Smith can still act, produce, earn, and headline global franchises. The ban was symbolic punishment dressed up as structural reform. Compare that to what would happen to a mid-level actor or a first-time filmmaker who committed the same act. No standing ovation, no counseling from Denzel, no comeback franchise, just silence, and a career that quietly disappears. The system doesn't hold powerful people accountable. It holds them in a holding pattern until the public moves on. And the public always moves on. This is the truth that Carrey and Chappelle both understood. Accountability in Hollywood isn't a principle. It's a negotiation. And the outcome depends entirely on what you're worth. The audience as architect. But here's where the story gets harder. Because it isn't just about Hollywood. And it isn't just about Will Smith. Start with the people who were erased that night. Questlove won his first Academy Award for Summer of Soul, a documentary about a forgotten 1969 black music festival in Harlem. A film that was itself about how culture buries important stories. His category was announced moments after the slap. Chris Rock, by still processing what had just happened to his face, had to read the winner's name off the card and hand over the trophy. Questlove later told Jimmy Fallon he had been meditating during the commercial break and didn't even realize what happened until he was walking to the stage. His producer, Joseph Patel, was more direct. He went on Twitter and said it plainly. "It robbed Summer of Soul and our team of our moment, of a loud, enthusiastic cheer for a celebrated film." Nobody talked about Summer of Soul that week. The headline was The Slap. A film about marginalized voices being silenced was itself silenced by the very machinery of spectacle it existed to challenge. And it wasn't just Questlove. Oscars co-hosts Wanda Sykes and Amy Schumer both said they were traumatized. Sykes told Ellen DeGeneres she physically felt ill. Schumer posted on Instagram that she was still triggered and traumatized. Sykes added something that revealed the deeper rot. "No one has apologized to us. We worked really hard to put that show together." Meanwhile, at the after-party, it was Chris Rock, the man who had been struck, who approached Sykes and said, "I'm so sorry. It was supposed to be your night." The victim was apologizing to the hosts because the system that was supposed to protect all of them had collapsed. But here's what makes this bigger than one ceremony. Think about the reaction on social media in the hours that followed. Twitter traffic spiked over 50% within minutes of the slap, more than any moment during the rest of the broadcast. TikTok surged 40% during Smith's tearful acceptance speech. The Google searches for alopecia jumped 600%. And within the hour, the most visceral act of live television in a generation was absorbed into the content machine. Memes, hot takes, engagement farming, Team Will versus Team Chris. A Nicole Kidman photo from earlier in the evening was misattributed as her reaction to the slap, and went viral anyway. A collage of celebrity reactions from the 2017 Moonlight mix-up was repackaged as if it happened in real time. Misinformation and spectacle merged so fast that the truth became irrelevant. What mattered was the content. Nobody grieved for Chris Rock in real time. Nobody had a serious conversation about workplace violence in the entertainment industry. The internet split into sides and started performing opinions for engagement, exactly the way the industry had trained them to. And this is the culture Jim Carrey and Dave Chappelle are pointing at, not just Hollywood's culture. Ours. A culture that consumes authenticity as a product. A culture that demands vulnerability from public figures, but punishes them the moment the vulnerability is real instead of rehearsed. We don't actually want our celebrities to be human. We want them to be convincing. And the moment the performance breaks down, the moment someone shows us who they actually are underneath 30 years of branding, we call it a scandal instead of recognizing it as the inevitable result of a system we all participated in building. Jim Carrey's avatar theory doesn't only apply to Will Smith. It applies to every influencer optimizing their feed, every executive curating their LinkedIn presence, every person selecting which version of their life to present to the world. We are all performing, and social media has turned every one of us into a miniature celebrity, managing image, chasing approval, terrified of the moment the mask slips. That's what Dave Chappelle walked away from at $50 million. Not the money, the trap. The understanding that once the industry and the audience decide who you are, every deviation from that image becomes a crisis. Not because you've done something wrong, but because you've disrupted the performance. And it's what Jim Carrey has spent years trying to articulate. That the identities we construct, celebrity or otherwise, are fragile precisely because they aren't real. They're scaffolding around an empty center. And the more energy we pour into maintaining the scaffold, the more violent the collapse when it finally gives way. The uncomfortable question isn't why Will Smith snapped. It's why we were so surprised. Why we assumed the impression was the person. Why we gave a standing ovation to a man who had just shattered the illusion. Because the illusion was more comfortable than the reality. And why, when the mask finally fell, we turned the whole thing into content instead of confronting what it actually meant. The mask came off for a moment, but the machinery behind it is still running, unseen and unchallenged. Hollywood applauded, the world watched, and the system quietly reset for the next performance. The real question isn't who falls next. It's how many of us will keep confusing the stage for reality. When the lights go down and the cameras stop rolling, what truths are we still too afraid to see?